Morning, and welcome to our final installment of our Limud Clali series on race and identity. And what I have to say I've been looking forward to since this series was first imagined and thought about at the beginning of this year. So you just heard the song, which has been our theme song this year, Bruce Hornsby's song, The Way It Is. And it's a song about race and how we think about it as a country. And if our thoughts about race are just the way they've always been, or have they changed at all? But given that we have an alumni panel today, I wanted to think about, is that true for our school? That's 18 years old, and I've been here for 16 of them. So one thought I had was, I chaperoned the prom last Sunday, and it was for the 12th time. And I'm listening to the music, and I hear Backstreet Boys, and Ellie, and TLC. I'm like, well, that sounds like proms I've been to before, music about 10, 15 years ago. And of course, my dance moves too are stuck somewhere in the 1980s, so we can talk about that another time. But when I really think about this school over its 18 years, I think one thing that we've taken pride in as teachers and as students is to really rethink our basic assumptions. Not to leave things the way they are, but really to think in new ways about them. And our school community over the past 2 years was part of an accreditation self-study process, which concluded a month ago with a team visiting our school. And that involved polling a lot of members of our community, students, faculty, parents, but most importantly, alumni, who told us a lot about what this experience meant to them and what advice they could give us after going into the world with this Gann education. And among the many insights they shared with us, and for me, the one that jumped out the most, is how we could really help future generations of Gann students, meaning all of you in this room, is to better prepare you for a diverse world. And that's the reason behind this series, and in particular behind the panel today. And there are many alumni we could have chosen, so before I turn to the panel, I did want to read a little bit of excerpt of one alumna who could not be here. Casey Moyer, class of '08, classmate of Daniel Gasprin. More immediate connection to this community happens to be the daughter of our esteemed Dean of Students, Layla Goodman, who shared a lot about her experiences here at Gann on this topic and her concerns about how peers in her time didn't have a full appreciation of the issues. And I was going to read one paragraph from a much longer piece that she said, which I think will set the tone for this panel discussion. So these are her words, quote, "It is my great hope that the current students at Gann will begin to question their responsibilities towards justice as Jewish people, as well as ask questions about what they don't know. Read books by diverse authors. Place yourself in situations that are beyond your comfort zone. Ask questions of your teachers about what justice looks like to them. Stay educated about the hashtag Black Lives Matter movement. Not to know is not enough." And it's that last line about not to know is not enough. I think this has been the goal of this series, has been to prepare you for a conversation happening on the college campus and beyond. And I'm really thrilled that these three alumni have given of their time to share their thoughts and stories with us. I'm going to introduce the moderator of our panel, who will then introduce the other two alumni guests that we have. This morning's moderator will be Anya Manning, graduate of Gann, the class of 2003. She is currently a strategy analyst at City Year, a national education nonprofit. Prior to City Year, Anya and her husband, Ellie Lehman, Gann class of '04, spent a year volunteering with local women's rights organizations on the Thailand-Burma border and in Kenya through American Jewish World Service. The experience was challenging, illuminating, and transformative. From 2009 to 2012, Anya was the Jewish Service Learning Manager at Repair the World, where she managed a $2 million grant portfolio and supported the organization's research and evaluation work. She holds a BA in Environmental Science from Barnard College and a BA in Midrash from the Jewish Theological Seminary. This past summer, she joined the Board of Trustees of Gann Academy and is currently the co-chair of the Alumni Committee. For fun, she enjoys running and exploring new neighborhoods by bicycle. So I'm really thrilled that Anya's agreed to moderate the panel today and help to put it together. So please join me in welcoming Anya Manning.
I speak for all of us that we are really, really excited to be here. So I wanted to introduce my two fellow alumni here. Arielle Boguslav is a Gann alum from 2007. After graduating Gann, Arielle moved to England to study archaeology and anthropology at the University of Cambridge. After finishing her degree there, she worked for a couple of years, and then she wanted to transition to a career with greater social impact. And so she earned a certificate in English as a foreign language and spent over a year teaching English at Wall Street English Language in Moscow. She is currently a City Year Corps member, serving as a tutor and mentor to 10th grade students at Boston Public School, and she'll be teaching 8th grade English at Yes Prep in Urban Charter School, Houston, this fall. Jon Elkin. I've known Jon Elkin since Jon was 3 years old, but I won't tell you those stories. Jon graduated from Gann in 2004. He then went on to the University of Rochester, graduating there in 2008, where he majored in political science and African and African American studies. He spent a semester abroad in Kenya. After graduation, Jon joined the U.S. Peace Corps and served in Azerbaijan, leading a high school teaching leadership skills and English. After that, he then led a high school program in Ghana with American Jewish World Service, and subsequently worked at a corporate social responsibility consulting firm in Washington, D.C. Jon is now a dual degree graduate program student, completing a master's in international relations and economics at Johns Hopkins, and an MBA at Tufts School of Business at Dartmouth. At Tufts, Jon is a co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, which seeks to effect institutional change to better prepare students to leverage and navigate an increasingly diverse global business world. I will say that Jon had a final today for business school and chose to take it early in order to be here today. So, thank you, Jon. So before we begin sharing a little bit about our story and our journey, I wanted to do an exercise all together. So I'm just going to say a couple statements, and I want you to stand up if this applies to you. How do you guys feel about that kind of exercise? Stand up if you have ever been in a situation where you're in the minority. Okay, stand up if you talk about race at home. Stand up if you think everyone in America should be required to speak English. Okay. Stand up if you feel privileged. Great. See? Stand up if both of your parents went to college. Okay. Stand up if talking about race and privilege makes you uncomfortable. So I didn't stand up for that, but I think all of us on the panel also feel a little bit uncomfortable talking about race and privilege. So we aren't here with an agenda or to share any facts about race and privilege. We really want to share our experiences, some lessons learned on the way. So I'll ask some questions in the beginning, and then we'll leave some time at the end for you all to really ask questions. And we want to make this panel as interesting and helpful for you as possible, so we really encourage you to ask some questions. So, let's start with Arielle. When did you first notice race?
So I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that it was not very early on in my life as a person, I guess. I was sort of aware of it in high school, on the news, things like that. When I went to college, there was some discussion of it, but it was a pretty non-diverse college that I went to in England. So again, not so much. The first time would be probably in Russia when I heard Russian people speaking negatively about the idea of black skin, and there were a lot of stereotypes and racist comments being made. And then most recently and most strongly now when I work with city or where I'm in a public school that's majority students of color.
I would say, in a similar vein, I learned that in high school kind of more as an abstraction, as an academic topic. A topic that I knew was important, but didn't really engage with the issue until going to college, where I found myself in more of a diverse environment. I noticed that I felt uncomfortable, that I felt like I didn't really know how to talk about race or engage with people with different backgrounds. And that's kind of what encouraged me to explore the topic academically when I was there in college.
How did Gann prepare you to live in a diverse world?
So I would say that some of the preparation was just beginning to talk about some of the news stories that were related to race or diversity overall, and a lot of it was this sort of pluralistic element of how do you deal with people who think differently from you. But I would say that there are two really important parts to being able to live in a diverse world. One of them is just having the open-mindedness to allow for that kind of difference, and then one of them is the skill set that you need to be able to connect with people who are different from you, and that's both the knowledge about them to find that commonality, but also just how do you build relationships with people if that commonality isn't obvious. And I would say that that open mindset was definitely, I was unprepared for it again, but that skill set and that actually the practice of going out and talking to people who are really different from me and trying to build those relationships was not something that I got the opportunity to do very often again, but I was lucky and I had that opportunity in England and Russia and now City.
Yeah, so I think this is an important question. I think that it's very easy to say, because a lot of us in this room have a lot in common in terms of our backgrounds, that the school does not prepare us very well for diversity or race. I think that the areas in which we are different, the way that we see what it means to be a Jew, in a different sense, that's a very intense type of difference. And the experience of being a Gann kind of forces you to navigate that difference in a way of like, how do we pray when we go on a Shabbaton? I made the mistake my freshman year again, saying to myself, like, well, the Orthodox kids, they want to have a minion in a certain way, then why don't we just do it that way? And then I was reminded by an upperclassman who was a woman who said, no, I actually want to be counted as a minion. And that to me as a freshman in high school, the first time I was dealing with this was like, oh, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think having the practice of putting myself in someone else's shoes and thinking that it's not just going to the highest common factor, denominator, that was a very important experience. At the same time, I think I still had a lot to learn when I got to college, and probably felt less comfortable on issues of race than a lot of my peers may have felt.
When we talk about minority and majority, sometimes the minority is actually the privileged minority. And I experienced that very clearly when I was in Kenya. And I, as a white person, I was in the privileged minority. As a woman, I was not a privileged minority. And I felt for the first time oppressed as a woman and very privileged as a white person. People would come up to me trying to make me a good African woman, asking me why my husband wasn't dressed appropriately, or if he was hungry, it was my fault he was hungry because I didn't feed him. So being put into that kind of box, but also being put into the box as a white person. And the respect that I got, the opportunities that I got as a white person, but still the minority. And both of you have spent time, have consciously put yourselves in positions where you are the minority. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about how you came to make those decisions.
Yeah, I don't think for me it was about a desire to be in the minority. I think it was an acknowledgement that the American experience that I've had is not one that's shared by a very large number of Americans. And I think it was very easy coming from where I came from, a suburb of Boston and Newton, going to Jewish day school throughout my entire life. I hadn't been exposed to that so far on an interpersonal basis. And for me, going to college was a real opportunity to kind of push myself into a different way of seeing what it means to be an American, what a different experience might be. So I started taking classes on on race and civil rights at Rochester. I use my term study abroad in Kenya as a way of trying to better understand and learn about a different type of experience. I'll also say that I think throughout high school, I think a lot of it was informed by a feeling of guilt, I would say, that there wasn't a lot that I did to not deserve the opportunities that I had, but there also wasn't a lot that I did to deserve those opportunities either. And I think I had a very hard time looking around the world and seeing, why is it that basically from the moment that I was born, I was guaranteed a 4-year college degree. I was guaranteed to be treated and to be assumed that I was a nice, respectable kid. And there are a lot of kids in this country where that is not the assumption. And I think I had a very hard time with that. That manifested itself in me at early ages as a feeling of guilt. That's since transformed, I think, to a more productive way of feeling about the issue. But it was definitely guilt that motivated a lot of those choices.
So for me also, I wasn't actively seeking to be a minority. I ended up going to college in England out of a desire just to see other parts of the world, and knowing that an experience in America and different parts of America, of course, are different, but was going to be different from the rest of it. And I think for me, so England was interesting because there was a lot of adaptation that I did in the way that I spoke. And I came back to America and was talking to friends that I had here, and they sort of felt a little bit offended that I had changed the way that I spoke, and talked about it almost like being a traitor or being unreal, or inauthentic rather. And I found that really odd and frustrating, and there were also some Americans that I met in England who refused to change the way they speak. They wouldn't call a cookie a biscuit, they would only ever call it a cookie. And for me, I didn't understand why that would be, I didn't know how to navigate, well, is calling it a cookie really something that's true to me or authentic, or is it fine if I adapt it? And I very much learned a lot about understanding, so where are the things that I'm comfortable with changing and that are important to adapt, and where are the things that are core to me? And that became even more important in Russia when the sense of what's moral was very different between the students that I was teaching and the friends that I had, and then my own experience and background. And
Jon, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about the evolution of that feeling of guilt and perhaps undeserved privilege, and how you think about that now in that journey.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think coming from a place of a guilt type orientation towards these issues is kind of a paralyzing feeling. You feel like you don't deserve what you have. It kind of paralyzes you. You don't know how to act upon that. You just feel bad for yourself, and it doesn't empower you to do anything to further the issue that you care about. I think what's really important, what everyone in this room has an opportunity to feel or to think about it, or to consider going forward, is do I really live in a vacuum where these issues don't impact me on a personal level? And I think when you start to think about that, with how interconnected the world is, both internationally and domestically, thinking about a lot of these issues that we're seeing around the country, in New York, in Missouri, in Baltimore, and then a wide variety of issues that go beyond that scope. How do those issues affect me? And I think one thing that I'm working on now at Tufts at Dartmouth, which is not an incredibly diverse place in comparison to its peer schools, is if I'm going to go out into the world and be a leader in a company or in a nonprofit or in government, I need to understand these experiences. I need to understand how people with different backgrounds think and experience the world. I need to understand how my actions impact other people, because otherwise I'm not going to be effective. You can't operate in the United States as a white male and think that as long as you understand white men, you're going to be in good shape. So I think coming at it from that perspective is what gives me the authority and ability to make the claim that we all need to be thinking about these issues, and it gives me also the empowerment motivation to pressure the administration of the school where I'm at to say, you're not preparing me in an adequate way to go out into the world and do what you hope I'm going to do. So I would say, that's kind of the evolution.
Great. So Arielle, you work in a Boston public school. Majority of the students are minority students. It's widely known across our country. Only 2% of students are, 2% of teachers are males of color. So I'm wondering if you see that statistic mirrored in your school and how that plays out and what are the consequences of that for our education system and for how we are raising children.
So I serve in a high school that's from 9th through 12th grade, and I think there's about 600 students in the school over those 4 grades. And there is, I believe, one male teacher of color, and that's it. There are a large number of male teachers. They are all whites otherwise. There's also a fairly large number of female teachers. I'm not sure if the ratio there is equal or not. In terms of consequences, that's something that I feel a little bit unprepared to answer in an expert way, so I'll sort of give you just my experience with my students so far. And I would say that the high school students that I have daily contact with don't express any conscious awareness of that disparity or that it should be any different than it is. But they definitely do have a much closer and faster connection they've made with the one male teacher of color, and to some extent students also with other female teachers of color as well. And that's not expressed in a this person's like me or has my background or my color, and it's expressed actually in a this person's a better teacher. And I can't speak to that, whether that's true or not, but it makes me wonder whether you can build trust and respect a lot more easily with someone who looks like you or has your background. I noticed that with the other citier people in my team, we have 3 people of color, one of whom has an upper class background and 2 of whom went through BPS and have a sort of a lower class background. And there's a clear difference in how easily the students connect with the 2 people who are from Boston Public Schools, have some of the same language and slang and that same experiences compared with myself, all of the other white core members, and even this the black core member who's from a higher socioeconomic class. So there's that connection. I think also there's value in learning and meeting people that are different background of yours, as long as you can build that trust and respect.
How does your Jewish identity or learning shed light on your work right now to create a more equitable society?
Sure. I don't think it's a conscious piece of it, but I think that there's a lot in Jewish history and tradition that encourages us to think about issues of equity and justice, to be empathic, to think about how it is to be someone else who's going through a tough time. This is a very big part of Jewish history, and we are commanded to imagine ourselves in those shoes. And through U.S. history, there's many examples of Jewish communities standing up with oppressed minorities and other groups, standing with them and seeing themselves in solidarity with their cause. So I think that, kind of implicitly and subconsciously through my education in Jewish day schools and through my parents and community members, I think I always saw a connection that being Jewish and caring about these issues went hand in hand. They were not at all exclusive of each other.
So I think for whatever reason, I'd like to think that being accepting of diversity and open-minded and all those different positive skills are things that I would have whether or not I was Jewish, and they're not directly connected with my Jewish background. That said, I'm sure all the discussions that we had about those things again affected my mindset. But I would say that the biggest effect that I can point to in my Jewish identity and how I relate to diversity has to be when being a minority as a Jewish person in England and also in Russia. And that was on a couple of different fronts. First, that in England, so when I ate in the cafeteria at Keep Kosher, they would give me these like airline meals that were these big plastic wrapped things. So it was something that I couldn't hide that was distinctly different about me and anyone else. And so I would get constantly questions from people about what it was and why it was. And this whole idea that you'd have any kind of dietary restriction was completely foreign for pretty much anyone there. And so they'd explain, well, it's dietary laws. And, well, what does that mean? And often they would ask questions like, well, why can't you eat this thing? It doesn't have meat in it, I don't understand. And from a perspective that felt to me very often like, well, I'm the one who knows what kosher is, so why are you suggesting that you should know more about what it is? So I think I learned a lot about how to ask questions in different ways and to try to be aware of that line between curiosity and prying into somebody's life. Because sometimes there were days where I had a bad day and the last thing I wanted to do was sit down at dinner and not be able to eat because I had to give a whole spiel on what kosher food meant. And there was one time that I was sat across the head of my school, across the table, and she kept looking over and staring at my big plastic thing that had stuff everywhere and taking up the whole table. She wasn't going to ask because it would be impolite, but I also couldn't start the conversation. So it was just this awkward thing that was in the table the whole time, like the white elephant sort of thing. So I think that those sort of questions and respect.
What do you think are the white elephants in the room as it relates to race and privilege today?
Wow, yeah, it's a big one. And I think at some level, this is not meant to be a cop-out of this question, but I think at some level, anything under this umbrella can be a white elephant for different people. I think this can be an uncomfortable thing to talk about, and different people have different tools to talk about it. So I think, whenever you engage in this topic, I think it's kind of important to think that whatever you're talking about might be very uncomfortable for whoever else you're with. But I think, right now what we're seeing around the country with police violence and police brutality, I think a white elephant is hopefully coming out into view a little bit more of an issue that I think this country has been struggling with since its inception and before, which is that the institutions that comprise the United States are not really acting in equitable fashions. And there are histories that kind of inform the way in which police departments act today. This is not a new phenomenon. It's only new that it's been on the news as often as it's been on the news. So I think talking about this issue is bringing the white elephant out into view a little bit more. But I think that the next challenge is to talk about this not just in the context of police brutality, or just in the context of should we have body cameras of police officers, but how is what's happening here endemic of a larger issue in the United States, that the way in which we administer our laws and think about how we act as a nation, how is that either fair or not fair to the citizens of this country?
So I think that answer depends on what level of conversation you're talking about. There could be a white elephant in the conversation that I have with you, or in a larger group setting, or on the setting of the whole national media kind of element. And I think that at the higher level, a lot of what's talked about is, well, this thing was wrong, or this thing is not showing equity, or isn't equal, or isn't fair, or yes it is, there's nothing wrong, and that kind of back and forth debate. And the thing that I don't see happening as much on that public scale is saying, well, forget what is or isn't true about what's happening now, but what does a society that we all agree upon and that we all think is positive look like, and how do we find that sort of shared vision? And only then can you go back and say, well, how close are we to that now, and what would have to happen to change that?
So I'm going to have one more closing question, and then I'll open it up to you guys to ask some questions. So I'll just ask you to close with, what are some of the greatest lessons that you've learned so far about race, privilege, diversity?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one important piece, I think, is to be open and curious about other people. And I think that whenever you find yourself in different environments, a different culture, you're traveling abroad, you're living abroad, whatever it is, people will always just appreciate that you are interested in how they live their life, and you're interested in learning how they see the world. And that's very platitudinal, and that's kind of very, very amorphous, but it's manifested in saying yes to invitations to go to kind of things that might make you a little bit nervous, or asking questions about why they do certain things. These are lessons that I learned being abroad, and they worked pretty well for me. I think the other lesson is also to, I think I've learned a bit more tools on how to look at how the media talks about certain things happening in this country, and how the narrative and the language that's used informs perception and kind of underlines a lot of the institutional and endemic issues that we're encountering. And I think if you look at the way in which the riots in Baltimore were talked about, and the way in which the shootings in Waco, Texas, with the biker gang of a bunch of white guys is talked about, I think you'll see there's a very different treatment of two events that really on scale are not really comparable at all. I mean, you have people in Baltimore that are feeling like the social contract, what they gave up of their freedoms to the government is not being returned to them in the equitable application of laws. It's being misadministered, and people are dying in police custody, and they don't feel like there's another voice. And this is, of course, my opinion on this, but they don't feel there's another way to voice their disapproval versus what we're seeing in Waco, which is you know, the people there are termed outlaws and romanticized terms. Anya circulated an article today. There was an op-ed in the New York Times that kind of highlighted this as well. The way in which we call people in Waco outlaws and biker gangs, and people in Baltimore that they're hoodlums and they are arsonists and rioters. These are pejorative terms. So I think thinking a little bit about how to parse the media language and the way in which the public talk about these issues and how it's informed a lot by our assumptions. That's been a great takeaway.
I think for me, I've been struck by how easy it is for whatever are your norms to become assumptions about how things work everywhere else, or how those things should work everywhere else. And I've had the privilege in living in other countries to sort of be surprised by how things can be different. And there's a really great TED video, and the name of which I've forgotten, it's really short, but this man is trying to illustrate that point. He says, well, so if you go to an unfamiliar place in America, most of the Western world, and you ask, what's the name of this street, you would get a street name, that's how you know. If you then go to an Asian country, some Asian countries, and I believe Japan was the example, and you ask what's the name of the street, you say, well, there's no name of the street, you have to go by the name of the block, so the space that's in between the streets. And so, until I watched the video, had never thought that you would do anything other than name the street. And they don't. And then, you know, of course, my initial assumption was, wait, but if it's the blocks and it's numbers, like, how do I follow something down? How do I get directions? It doesn't seem logical to me. But really, there's a whole country where that works. And it's so learning a lot to think about what are my assumptions? How could those things be different? Why can they be more than one way? How can they be more than one way? And I think also that leads me to something, I'm sure you're all familiar with the golden rule of treat others the way you want to be treated. And I think actually for me the learning is not that you should treat other people the way that you want to be treated, but that you should make the effort to understand how they want to be treated, because it may be different from how you yourself want to be treated. And so it's sometimes referred to as the platinum rule, that you should treat others the way that they themselves want to be treated.
Please stand and just introduce yourselves. So again.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm a senior. I really appreciate you being here. I was wondering what made you feel like you were qualified to go to the city here to do the Peace Corps. And I guess how you decided that you were the best people to take those positions and work in this community.
So I would say that I'm not the best person or the best qualified to do it, but that I will absolutely commit to being better at doing it every day and to always learning to do it. And that is a tough thing for me, because I sometimes will watch people in my school and outside of my school who I don't believe are qualified to do it, and do things in ways that I disagree with, and then the question is, well, so could I be like that too? And so I would say the most important thing is to be reflective. If you are reflective and can see what you're doing and analyze it and understand where you want to go, then you hopefully will never be in a place of stagnation where you're doing something that remains and is consistently the wrong thing or negative or not right or whatever you want to be, and that you can move forward.
Yeah, I would echo that for sure, but I would say, you know, how does anyone feel qualified that they can do the job that they're going to do? I mean, when you get hired in any position. You know, you're kind of scared as hell. Like, do I know what I'm doing? It's gonna work out. You know, do I belong here? They're gonna see through me, whatever it is. You know, I went to the Peace Corps. I was 22 years old. I hadn't had a real job. I didn't see myself as a professional, but I needed to act as a professional. Do I wish I had a few more years under my belt before, maybe having worked before? Yeah, I think that probably could have been a good thing. But I wanted this so bad, and I felt like it was so important, and I felt like it was aligned with my values, and I wanted to learn, I wanted to grow in this environment. And there were a lot of things that I didn't do that well, and I failed with that first year that were very hard. And someone who had a teaching degree and had experience in the classroom probably could have done a lot better than I did. But I tried really hard. And I made a lot of mistakes, and I did the things that I thought that I knew how to do well. And ultimately, you know, I mean, you know, I think you make an impact in the way in which your strengths allow you to make impacts. And you find those areas, and you do your best job, and you come at it with an open and intentional mindset. And I think it works out pretty well for the most part.
I'll just say it is a privilege to be given an opportunity that's paid to work with a community that is outside your comfort zone or outside a normal or traditional job. There's also a huge amount of responsibility and maturity that comes with that. Arielle works more hours than anybody in this room. She's at school before the students are at the school, and she's at school for 3 or 4 hours after the students leave. And then sometimes she's there on the weekends or in the evenings doing a science fair for them or helping them with the MCAS. I mean, she works extremely hard as a Corps member and gets paid very little. She is qualified for food stamps. Not to out her, but that's how it works with AmeriCorps in the city here. Doing the Peace Corps is not a cushy job. So it is both, I think you're right to ask the question about privilege, but I think that it's about marrying the mindset in which you go into those experiences. So you don't go in saying, I'm going to teach these people how it's like, but it's the maturity to go in to say, what am I going to learn from this experience, and what can they learn from me, and what is the reciprocal relationship that we can create? Because for me, is about this shared humanity that we're all a part of. And so the pain points are when we forget that. And the two of you both chose paths to really put yourself in positions that are not always comfortable, that were off the beaten path in a lot of ways, but bringing that mindset with you as you enter those communities, and how you ask those curious questions is really what made you both successful in that. Okay, another question. Yeah, just say your name. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm going to college next year, and I was interested. I heard as an African American Studies major. I was wondering what that was. What?
No, sorry.
I was wondering what that was like coming from Gann and then going into classes like that, and what you felt your role in those classes was.
Yeah, that's a good question. I remember that first term. I went to college not intending to major in African American Studies. I came to college, saw all the course offerings. You can see hundreds of course offerings. They're all incredible. I remember in history classes, Mr. Cadden here, civil rights movements. These were issues that I found to be very, very inspiring and interesting to me. I took a class on race in America, the history of race in America. And it was a seminar-style class offered once every 4 years in Rochester. So the class had a lot of upperclassmen in it, which to me was intimidating. You know, here, a lot of you guys are big fish in small ponds. You go to college, you're small fish in big ponds. And it was very intimidating. And I think I did not understand what it meant to be white. I didn't understand privilege. Questions like, are Israelis white? To me was kind of like an interesting question. And you know, is whiteness in the context of the United States? Is whiteness linked to being privileged? Is non-whiteness linked to being not privileged? How does that interact? And you know, there are a lot of things that I said in that class that were just like completely, you know, indicative of my lack of experience in talking about these kinds of issues. The professor posed a lot of questions to us about, you know, the social politics around hair. And he kind of put a scenario to the class of, if there's a white woman sitting in front of a black woman and she's playing with her hair, is that an offensive act, or should that be talked about in a racial context? And these were like mind-exploding, things that I had never even thought of could even be controversial or problematic to make someone feel one way or the other. So in short, the classes were incredible and fascinating. They were hard, and I think what I enjoyed about them is that I grew as a person in them, not only as an academic. And I think that's what encouraged me to keep on taking classes in Afghan studies. And then one morning my junior year, I realized that I was only a few away from a major, and I was like, yeah, let's do this. This sounds great. But yeah, I mean, that's about that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was just wondering why we're asking in the beginning, he thinks that everyone in America should be required to speak English. If you did, maybe we should talk about it over there. Also, for you, I was wondering what you meant when you said Israeli's white, and I'm Israeli, and then I'm Israeli, like that.
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, so there was two questions. One was about the opening exercise when I asked who thinks that everyone in America should speak English. So what was I thinking behind that? And the second was a little bit about Israelis being white and the struggle with that. So speaking English I think, will be a continuous, growing issue and topic in America, as we see a growing number of people who are growing up in homes where English is not the first language and not the language spoken at home. And there's been a lot of studies now talking about the long-term impacts of the number of words spoken at the home from ages 2 to 5, and what that means for success in the future. So I think there's an interesting emerging conversation. I don't think it's bubbled up yet around whether the language that we're talking about is English, whether we are becoming a bilingual country. But what privilege comes with growing up in a home where English is the first language and feeling like you can walk into any store and the language that you're most comfortable in is the language that you'll be received in. And I would say in a more complicated way, that's walking into a doctor's office. Or there's an emergency and my native tongue is not understood by the person on the other line. So kind of what is the role of language and how we're privileging those who speak English?
And the other question, so that was in the context of, in this class that I took in my first year of college, the professor was getting us to think a lot about what is it, who is white, what is whiteness, what does that mean? And I think a provocative type of question for him was to talk about people who are white in different countries of the world and ask them, do we still think about that in the same context of whiteness and non-whiteness, or people of color in the United States, and how just trying to kind of drill down into that definition. It was a question that I was not really prepared to answer then, and I'm not really prepared to answer right now in terms of what is whiteness and how do we assign that term. I think a lot of it, of course, is tied into privilege and is tied into who is privileged. And in different societies, different people have that allocation. And it was just more in the context of that first class in college.
There are questions.
Hi, I'm Jethro Berkman. I teach Jewish Studies and the chair of the Jewish Studies Department. I have a question for Arielle. I am a former City Year Corps member in Boston in 95, 96. It was a very transformative experience for me. My work was focused actually mostly in an after-school program run by the Salvation Army. So I wasn't in the schools, and I'm wondering what you can tell us about a major, a large urban school system, what you're seeing there, what seems to be working well, what's working not so well, anything you've learned from your experience in the schools.
So it's an enormous question that I'm not sure I can do justice to in answering. And I think honestly, the best answer for me would be that you kind of have to go out and experience it, and that in itself is a learning. And so I would, in general, say that go seek experiences that are different from the ones that you've had. Because I had no idea what to expect. Even though I spent 6 weeks in training talking about what all of these schools are going to be like, it's not the same as being there and seeing it for yourself. I think things that I've learned are that there's a lot of standardized testing, and therefore a lot of stress for the students about that. This week was Math MCAS for my 10th grade students, and that was communicated to them a lot around it's their responsibility to do well on the MCAS, not for their own success in life. Not that anyone said it wasn't for their own success, but the primary message was that that's how they would protect the school community, because our school is in turnaround status, which means the state is coming in and monitoring and visiting and looking at test scores to decide whether the school remains open next year, or gets closed down, or gets turned into a charter school. And today, in fact, we had the superintendent coming to visit, and so the administrators come in and they prep the students and they say, we're going to be having these visitors, you need to be on your best behavior, and so all that stress goes on to the students. And it's even very openly spoken about as a show, that we are on show for them today, and that there's no connection in how we act today to how we should act normally, and that's deeply troubling to me, that there isn't a connection between what we're showing these people who are visiting to see what the quality of the school is, and what we do on a regular basis in this school. I would say also that it's important not to look at things from there's this idea of a deficit perspective, that you go in and you say what are all the problems and negatives, but that you also understand the positives. And I think the students in the school are amazing, and I freely give my whatever number of hours every day to do whatever I can to help them get where they need to get, and they have so much potential inside them. And to me, sometimes it's just frustrating and sad that I don't think the whole school is set up in a way that pushes that forward, that it puts up a lot of barriers and negatives, and it's not individuals necessarily, it's not just individuals, it's structures and systems, and so the whole idea of systemic racism is very much, you can just see it in the school and the things that happen there that are different from other schools that I've been in from this school. I mean, I've just never been in such a chaotic environment in my entire life, and this is supposed to be the place of structure and learning, and it's just not.
One more question, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Shira. I'm a freshman. And I'm wondering, how do you think being Jewish has affected your privilege or the meritocracy that America should be?
Good, thank you for a second. Oh, the question was, how has being Jewish affected your privilege and the meritocracy?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question. So I think that the idea of privilege is a relative term in a lot of ways. People are privileged in different areas in different ways. That's not to discount the overwhelming ways in which some people in this country are privileged, others are not. I think, you know, there's a lot of talk both within the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community of the ways in which being Jewish gives you more privilege. You know, looking at disproportionate numbers of the amount of the percentage of Jews in the United States versus percent in certain jobs, and people talk in those terms about it. You know, I would once again say that being Jewish, I think probably cuts both ways in different environments. I think there are some environments in which it kind of works against privilege in a sense, and there are some ways in which I think it enhances it. I think I've been very fortunate to have a network of people and to be thought of as a certain way, and people have certain impressions of what Jews are and who they are and what they're good at and what they're skilled at. So I think being afforded that assumption from day one, while on the one hand uncomfortable, I think it's also important to recognize that does afford me some degree of a privilege, and also being a part of a community that you know, that does hold certain positions in society is also an area of privilege. So I would say it's pretty complex and dynamic, but I think it definitely cuts both ways.
I think I probably have to agree with John that both sides. It's not an easy answer, and it's certainly ambiguous in many ways. I think the most interesting element in answering your question, and I apologize if this is sort of sidestepping your question a little bit, is that anytime you have an identity, a group identity that's strong, that you're part of a community of, and that you're sort of looking inside, you have a risk that you're not understanding or seeing or as aware of whatever's happening around and how those interactions happen. And so I think that a lot of my Jewish identity formed at my time at Gann, and then has been in contrast in being the only person who was Jewish in my immediate community. And I think that being conscious of not being solely focused inward and also not being the only one all the time is really important to then being able to navigate any discussions and understanding of privilege and how, because it's about how you interact or relate to other people when you talk about relative privilege.
Yeah, and I think it's a very American-centered question in a lot of ways, because you can imagine, we can quickly see how being Jewish in America could be a privilege, looking at the statistics of Jews in power and Jews in high-paying jobs. But I'm not sure that's true internationally for Jews in all countries. I think in some countries, being Jewish is not a privilege. And so balancing that complicated identity is really important. So we're gonna conclude here. I wanted to thank Jon and Arielle so much for being here. This is not a conversation that happens once. I hope that this is a part of conversations for the rest of your lives. So, thank you.
So, she said, everybody's Jason today for a couple moments, just a few closing remarks and want to send some thanks and to wrap up our series. Just 2 more moments for your attention. So I want to thank you all for giving your time, your stories, your insight, as we want to give you to keep your connection to our community and our school. Token of our appreciation to each of you. So that's 2 more remarks for everybody. You heard at the end the idea about being part of a network and a community. For the seniors in this room, in just a few weeks, you will join this alumni community, which is now close to 1,000 strong. Almost 1,000 students have now gone through Gann over these years. And that's a pretty special community. Many people think about, as you go through life, your college experiences will be a connection, certainly your religious community, your grad school you go to, but Gann is a special community as well. And I really hope you take advantage of the opportunity to get to know not only these 3, but the many other alumni who are in this area. Because I guarantee each of you, there will be at least one of those alumni who will go to the same college that you are going to go to, will be in the same field that you're interested in, or will have just a passion and interest. And I think it's really important to take the opportunity to connect with them. The very last thing I want to say as we close this series for the year is, so again, this is the last formal program we'll have on this conversation of race and identity. Where the conversation goes is up to each one of you. Each teacher, each student, if it's something that you want to continue, and if so, how in the community. It may not happen in this context, but if you want to see it continue in other contexts. I know that those who organized the series, the Limud Clali team, I want to thank them, and I want to thank the many facilitators who have facilitated conversations for many weeks for all of you. I am sure that all of them are happy to speak with you about if you want there to be more opportunities to think about these questions and issues. And certainly as the Limud Clali team goes into next year, surely they'll be rolling out what our themes and programs will look like. We are going to create opportunities for students to have more voice and involvement. If you're in that camp and you'd like to play that role, again, please reach out to me or other members of the Limud Clali community, and we will announce more shortly. Thank you for your attention today, and I'm here. Shabbat Shalom.